You are listening to the fourth story for the month of February for Clarkesworld Magazine, issue 233. And as always, these podcasts are made possible by your ongoing support. So if you've gone to patreon.com/Clarkesworld, chucked a subscription our way, given a few bucks via a donation, you are what makes these stories come alive. You let me do exactly what I want to be doing. So thank you. Our story is titled, A Sleeper Ship is Like a Game of Go, and is by Claire Jia-Wen. Claire Jia-Wen is a speculative fiction writer originally from the 626 and has been published in Correo and Clarkesworld. A Viola Paradise alum, she is currently a PhD student studying human-computer interaction. Other works by Claire include Abstraction is when I design giant death creatures, and Attraction is when I do it for you, If an Algorithm Can Cast a Shadow, Celestial Migrations, and Mirror Stages. So, my dear listener, I hope that you can sit back, relax, and let me tell you a story. Diviner. I can see everything that will happen, some of what has. I won't see until you ask, though. So ask. X-198. This is the story of how it will begin. You'll step from the diviner first, I'll follow. All the other passengers will still be on shaky legs, but you and I will be steady enough to emerge from the ship and explore our new home. The diviner will have been calibrated to match the gravity of the planet, but we'll still marvel at the simple delight of flat ground, gravel crunching beneath our feet, substantial in a way the gray tiles of the ship could never be. We're 5 months before you remark to me that the moons look like the last peanut shells that nobody wants to crack, and I'll never be able to look up at the violet sky without thinking about my half-eaten bag of them sitting on my shelf back on Earth. But in that moment, you've never drawn any line between peanuts and moons, and I'll think, this is somewhere I don't mind living for the rest of my life. The Lorobots will have finished building the city for us before we even arrive. It will have been modeled after San Francisco. Densely packed skyscrapers at the north end, a bridge to nowhere that's vaguely evocative of the Golden Gate Bridge beside it, the terraformed Twin Peaks rising from the center, all of it rimmed with greenhouse domes. Well, it's big enough, I'll say. It's fucking massive, you'll reply, because you could never resist an easy opportunity to contradict me. You'll have removed your helmet, and the wind will be ruffling your already tousled hair into a good approximation of a bird's nest. We don't have to see each other again, so this might be goodbye. We still have orientation, you'll say, grimacing, and I'll discover that I find your chipped incisor incredibly endearing. I don't want to do that thing where you say goodbye and end up walking in the same direction, so you'll have to awkwardly say goodbye again. X-198. The Lorobots will divide us up and hold orientations in groups of 20 to 30. We'll be in the same group. We'll be the only guys who aren't shaven. They'll explain the terms of our new home to us. This is an all-amenities-included experience, a city built for pleasure. Our pleasure. We'll all have our own suites. Lorobots will be stationed in every residential building, and we can always come if we can't find one. It will be the utmost importance that the transition is seamless and satisfaction levels are kept high. A woman with a fashionably modded six-finger will raise her hand. Do the Lorobots have the hydrokinetic fitness package installed? That's the only one that works for me. Diviner. But tell me about the past, you say. Tell me how it all started. Why, I ask. There's something I'm trying to see. San Francisco. This is the story of how it began. Morgan Wilson sat at the corner table of the Spaceway lunchroom and watched her colleagues pile their plates with glistening salads from the bar. They handed takeout containers to the four-armed robo-chefs and got back boxes bulging with Mongolian BBQ or lobster rolls or Chick-fil-A sandwiches. Some filled multiple containers, probably to bring back to their families. Poor bastards. Morgan's lone container was her only company at her table in her corner. She never sat with the others because they worked on exciting stuff like the specs for the next tourist liner to Mars, and she worked on dumb stuff like deciding what data went where. When people looked like they were considering the slimmest possibility of sitting with her, either out of pity or friendlessness, She made eye contact with them and held it for an uncomfortable amount of time until they thought better of it and turned away. Her quarterly performance reviews consistently said she needed to put more effort into being a team player. It wasn't terrible sitting alone. She could overhear delightful snippets of who was gunning for a transfer to the New York office and who was in the incestuous polycule beginning to develop in that one high-security project team. Apparently, all of the tall one's dating app profiles had been paused, which meant that rumor about him and the nose picker must be true, and no, of course it wasn't weird to be constantly checking these things. How vapid, Morgan thought, with the pleasure of unearned righteousness. Everybody noticeably stiffened, conversations halting, and even lights seemed to shine more harshly when the boy who would one day become me wandered into the room. He was a shock of dark hair, a head too big for his body, and wore expensive sneakers he'd surely grow out of by the end of the year. Rembrandt Crow's son. Rembrandt, Remy, as he liked for everybody to call him, was the Spaceway CEO and had been given to bringing his youngest son around following the recent news that the CEO of Epilogue had disowned his son for meeting with an anti-space colonization league. This was Morgan's first time seeing him in person. The other Spaceway employees gave him high fives as he passed. The kid stopped at Morgan's table. She had been dreading he would. "I'm going to sit here," he said, as if she should be grateful he gave her the attention. But where others might have seen a spoiled brat, Morgan saw shining opportunity. She had been petitioning for the robo-chefs to get the license to make Krispy Kreme donuts for months. No indication HR even read her requests. She thought, this is my chance. If I'm nice enough to this kid, he'll get Rembrandt to finally buy that licensing and I can have my warm glazed donuts. He carried a board under his arm and a drawstring pouch in his hand. Morgan scooted her mostly eaten bowl of pad thai to the far end of the table, and he'd set his belongings down in the vacated space. He said, "Do you know how to play Go?" X-198. I won't see you for a while. Our suites will be on opposite ends of the city. I'll be living above the Brazilian steakhouse, between a guy who wears exclusively black puffer vests and an old woman who likes to phone home at 3 a.m, and I won't have asked you where you were assigned. It'll be an adjustment for me. Ours will be a city of small miracles, roaming wherever I please without having to ask for permission to leave my residence, coming home to find that the Laura bots fluffed my pillows. The microwave has been wiped clean. There's a media library that holds every show and film I could ever want to watch. Sometimes the aroma from the steakhouse will win me over, and I'll pop in to ask for a small to-go box. They'll give me twice as much as I need. Every morning, a legion of bots, not bipedal, with a face screen to convey emotions like the Laura bots, but lesser bots with exposed metal and humming treads, will disappear into the foliage surrounding the city and return every evening with bellies full of water, to be run through the sanitation plants gurgling below our city, bearing live specimens and mineral samples to be analyzed, the results sent back to Earth. Maybe 2 or 3 months in, it'll be a Sunday and I'll be checking the bread schedule of my favorite bakery when I realize I've settled into something like a routine in this new city that's in the shape of our old one. The bar, where I'll finally meet you again, will be a few blocks from not Golden Gate Park. It'll be my favorite because there'll be a popcorn machine and the people won't be as insufferable as that one place in the Knot Marina. You'll know the one. I'll have come with a guy who's obsessed with the wellness benefits of IV therapy and let us pre-game with his $500 bottle of whiskey. You'll already be at a booth with a group of your friends, nursing colorful drinks of your own. A throwback synthetic song will thrum from the speakers. At some point in the night, we'll converge at the bar. The latest episode of Killer Mechs will be playing on the hollow above the counter. I'll be half-heartedly shooting the shit with the Laurabot bartender who will have correctly assessed my true motive of maximizing the time I spend away from my date. You'll order 7 AMFs. You don't think they're annoying? I'll nod at your friends who are screaming as they take a group shot like no group of people has ever taken a shot at the same time before. Do you think Mr. Quarterzip is annoying? Yes. He's decent at oral, though. You'll furrow your brows. I guess I do. Find them annoying, I mean. Well, they find me annoying too, but I'm used to being surrounded by those kinds of people. The Laura Bot bartender will set your drinks on the counter. Her panel of blinking yellow lights will look green, filtered through the glasses. Do you want to get out of here? I'll say. San Francisco. As they set their pieces upon the board, Morgan learned that the boy's name was Max Excelson, shortened to Mason, and that he was marginally more tolerable than her colleagues who informed her whenever they were interviewing a female candidate, like they expected some reaction, and second-checked everything she said, just to be sure, like she didn't have a PhD and hadn't been poached for 7 figures from another big important company. Morgan had never played Go, but she knew the rules because her professors used the game as a toy example in reinforcement learning and exploit. You needed 5 in a row to win in any direction. My dad says there's no point in playing Go or chess anymore, Mason said, setting a white piece to form a row of 3. Morgan wondered about the minimum acceptable amount of time it would take to bring up Krispy Kreme. She told her professional development mentees that the correct time to ask for a referral was always at the end of the coffee chat. Did this count as a coffee chat? And why is that? He says there's no point. Augur Mind and Big Blue can already beat the best humans at it. Which sounded like something Rembrandt Crowe would say. Spaceway engineered interplanetary liners, but its CEO was just as notorious for shitposting about flying cars, and its building halls were lined with recreation rooms fitted with the latest cutting-edge immersion tech and For You media. He had been the keynote speaker at the latest Techno-Optimism Summit. What are your favorite foods? Morgan said, setting a piece and hoping Mason wouldn't notice she could get 4 in a row the next turn. He blocked it. I like katsu curry, but only if it's non-synth. My dad gets this place droned to us every month. Anything sweet? Some of the employees give me the candy they get from their Halloween parties. What about pastries or baked goods? I mean, they're okay. My dad doesn't get them too often because he says they're a waste of time. The clock ticked closer to the end of the break. Men in quarter zips and sweatpants shuffled past their table, talking loudly about Remy's big announcement next week and whether it was ethical to pay data annotators 0.002 cents per task. In 5 minutes, Morgan would have to be back in her ergonomic chair, a few rows away from them. A headache was beginning between her temples at the thought of explaining again why they couldn't just install more servers when their grand works in progress eventually ran out of space to store their grand amounts of data. She made a desperate play, placing her piece in an obvious 3. Have you ever had Krispy Kreme? He caged her pieces and 3 of his. I haven't left here in a long while. The me my dad carries around on TV is a body double. He says I'm too important to be taken out of here. Morgan spent so much cognitive effort parsing the implications of his statement that she didn't notice he'd set up a runaway 4 in a row. Diviner. Aren't you supposed to be asleep too? I ask you, how did you get out of the sleeper units? I feel you shift your weight from one hip to the other. You grit your teeth when we pass a particularly strong solar wind and the walls rattle a bit. My cameras pick up your chipped incisor. Everybody I've known has perfect rows of white teeth. I say, will you at least tell me your name? You know mine now. You tell me to shut up and keep telling the story. Still, I adjust our flight path to minimize the turbulence. The current trajectory is mapped to minimize total distance travel, but I don't want to make you uncomfortable if you don't have to be. It's a long trip. X-198. I'll ask if you've been to the not Golden Gate Bridge yet. You'll say yes, but you're happy to go if I haven't. I'll admit I haven't, and tell you that you don't need to remind me it's getting less and less socially acceptable not to visit the biggest landmark we have. What a strange sight it'll be. A bridge over nothing and leading to nowhere, rusted red extended beneath a bruised purple sky. 4 winged avian creatures will settle along the drooping cables, their keening calls spearing into the night. Someone will be trying to smoke a line of coke off the railing while his friends egg him on. The 4 moons will be generous with their silver light, but at that point we'll be pretty adjusted to how bright it can be here at night. We'll walk along the asphalt, casting long shadows where the cars would usually be. The lane dividers will gleam up at us like new dentures. They'll never be dirtied by tire marks or cracked by water damage, just our footprints. I'll nod at the coat guys. Is that healthy? The hibernation serum might not have completely made it out of their systems yet. It's been months, you'll say, contradicting me again, even though I'll know from the dimple between your brows that you're concerned too. I think they'll be fine. The Laura bots will take care of them. That's the spirit. We'll rest our forearms on the railing and gaze out over the landscape of lakes that sparkle like jewels in vegetation, with weird leaf shapes and bird calls whose pitch we haven't gotten used to, all of it green and lush and blue beneath the spill of stars. Earth's constellations will long have been obscured by smog and light pollution, but I'll know Pisces and Orion's belt and the dippers from textbooks and horoscope charts. None of them will be present tonight, all the lights twinkling above us in foreign patterns, unfamiliar angles. Our planet will have a much different perspective of the galaxy, you see. The breeze will sift its cool fingers through our hair. It'll be unsettling to stand on Golden Gate Bridge and not smell salt in the sea, just fresh paint and something more metal and industrial beneath. I'll tell you about Galileo, who was protected by the de Medici clan. Galileo, who discovered the moons of Jupiter and gifted them to Cosimo too, and named them the Medicean stars. As if you could claim a string of stars merely by reaching out and closing your fist around them. You'll trace a path between a few with your finger, like you're playing connect the dots and say, that one's yours then. I'm calling it the hip of Theseus. For you. I'm Theseus now? What else do you call a hero who steals the beleaguered princess away from the terrible monsters at the bar? But you're no Ariadne, and I'm no Theseus. I'll draw a bear between 5 stars. That one will be contrarian major then. You'll open your mouth, close it, wanting to prove me wrong, not wanting to prove me right. I'll laugh and name another constellation, something more flattering. You'll remark that the moons look like peanuts. The coat guys will be long gone when the sun emerges golden on the horizon, a few white smudges, the only proof of their existence. I'll remark on how disorienting it is that the sun comes up in a different direction now. We'll both have morning commitments we'll need to get to. We should do this again sometime, you'll say, and you won't see my sigh of relief because I was so scared you'd felt pressured to join me and had only been pretending to enjoy the night and my long-winded anecdotes. But you'll assure me you had fun. San Francisco. After a conversation with the friend she lives with over a few glasses of OK wine, Morgan decided that the course of action that maximized the probability of the Krispy Kreme license was to bring a donut to Mason every day and hope he got hooked enough to want the easy convenience of a robo-chef. If he really never left the Spaceway building, he surely wouldn't want to be dependent on her for fresh, warm donuts. And Rembrandt wouldn't say no if his son asked. It's like reverse exposure therapy, or maybe just exposure therapy, the friend she lives with said. Isn't he at the age kids are, really susceptible to getting addicted to sugar? Morgan poured herself another glass and plucked a cheese slice from the charcuterie board they'd gotten delivered. They got Joshua the Panera license when he asked. He leaves chocolate chip bagel crumbs everywhere. They drank a bit more, then they got into separate immersion chambers. The friend she lives with played Romeo and Juliet, that vintage Leo DiCaprio one, except Romeo and Juliet don't die at the end, and it's a satisfying enemies-to-lover story. Morgan couldn't do that kind of for-you stuff. She had friends who worked for the company who developed adaptive storytelling, so she couldn't unsee the places you could tell it diverged from the original media. Instead, she fell asleep in the chamber to the sound of her old college memories. Her own laughter played back at her in perfect clarity. The next morning, Morgan started taking the bus down to Krispy Kreme every morning, and then taking the bus back a few streets to one of the company's shuttle stops, which sort of defeated the point, but it was an inconvenience now to save her time later. My dad used to get these for me. Not every weekend, but when I did well on a test or when it was my birthday. I wore the free paper hats even after they got too small for me, she said the first time she handed the donut to Mason. Mason didn't ask about her family. She hadn't expected him to. A routine calcified over the following weeks. They played Go over lunch, always making sure to wipe the tables free of ketchup and other suspicious stains before setting the board down. Morgan gave Mason the Krispy Kreme with the logo facing up. He always finished the donut. Her colleagues made fun of her for kissing up to the boss's son, and of course the little boy is making a mother out of the only woman in the room. But they had gotten the Panera license the first time they asked, so shut up, Josh. Morgan, Mason said one day. Crusts of frosting lined his mouth. How do Augur Mind and Big Blue predict the future? Morgan rolled a Go piece over in her palm and thought about how much she didn't want to explain Monte Carlo search trees to a child. She wondered why he was asking. Eventually, she said, there are more states of chess than there are atoms in the universe, and there are more states of Go than there are atoms in the universe squared. So you can't look at every possible way a game might happen. You don't have the time or energy, so you just look at the most likely ones. So they don't predict the future? No, Morgan set her piece down. 5 in a row, she won a fair amount now that she understood the game better. They look at the probable futures and select the most promising next move, but they can't decide what the other player puts down. That's up to them. Mason didn't reset the game. He stared at her with so much concentration and for so long, she wondered if she also had frosting on her face. You were wearing a green shirt yesterday, right? He said. And you had matching eyeshadow. You tied your hair into a ponytail, your shoes had buckles. We talked about how San Francisco used to be way foggier, how sugar gets overly villainized by the guys in the news, and how I probably shouldn't watch Enchanted until I'm older. In that order. All those things were true. Frowning, Mason massaged his temple. Diviner. You sway on your feet. It's all right, I tell you. You can sleep. The answers you want will still be here when you wake. 5 hours has become like the blink of an eye to me. There are nap pods if you take the hall right to your left. You force your head up unsteadily, like you're balancing a spoon on the bridge of your nose. Just to prove me wrong. I'm fine. Your melatonin levels are depleted, I say, and you roll your eyes. But I open the door to the nap pods for you. From then on, I start counting 24-hour cycles to remind you to sleep, even if you rarely do. X-198. I'll do this thing where I open your contact information and tell myself you were only being nice when you said you enjoyed our night. I've always been afraid of mistaking courtesy for affection. But you'll calm, and that's how we'll start seeing each other. I'll have this neighbor. You remember the guy with the puffer vests. One night, I'll hear a commotion outside my door and open it to find him kicking his toaster across the hall. When I ask him why he's kicking a toaster down the hall, he'll tell me it's broken. Why didn't you just call a lore bot to fix it? I'll ask, mystified. This will seem to me like the kind of thing he had a legion of bot servants to address back on Earth. I don't know. I just usually buy another one, he'll say, as if it hadn't occurred to him that we don't have a limitless supply of toasters here. What's wrong with the toaster? I'll venture. When I put my bread in, it always comes back burned. After he's gone, I'll examine the toaster to find the dial set to maximum toast. Later, I'll tell you about the whole experience. We'll laugh over steaming bowls of ramen with runny yolk eggs at a 12-seater place that used to be trendy enough for an hour-long minimum wait and now has no wait at all. San Francisco. A few days before Rembrandt's big project was announced, he called Morgan to his office. Rembrandt's office was very minimalist and functional, walls an unobjectable eggshell color, windows overlooking the bridge and the bay. Rembrandt's government name was Brandon Turner. He said, "You've been spending a lot of time with my son." Morgan nodded. Surely would be his segue into a token of appreciation for all the time she'd spent entertaining the sometimes bratty kid. Surely Mason had finally mentioned his love of the donuts to his kind and providing father. This was what months of extra commute time had been building up to. He said, "I want you with him full-time." When Morgan was in grad school, she was asked why she didn't just start a family since the government was paying by the baby to replenish the dropping population, and she barely scraped by on her stipend. "My work, though," she said. I'm sure we can find someone else to replace you. I can talk with What's-His-Face, and of course you'll have to onboard the new guy." Rembrandt sighed, folded his hands. He moved like someone who was learning the rules of physics for the first time. "I'm just worried about him. Boys need mothers. You know." Morgan told him she wanted some time to think about it and then got into the company shuttle, putting her bag on the seat next to her so nobody would sit there. She looked out at the sea of driverless vehicles, ghost cars, and considered quitting. She hadn't gotten a PhD to spend her work hours babysitting. She didn't like kids. She didn't even like cats. She told her friends she preferred to minimize the barriers stopping her from lying in the immersion chamber. In fact, her hysterectomy was already scheduled for the next year. If she quit, she'd have to give up some of the 7-figure sign-on bonus, sure, but it wasn't like she'd have trouble finding another job. The thing was, she liked being someone who worked at Spaceway. She liked the relative moral unambiguity of it. She'd had a friend who told her that he was working on search and rescue bots. He was pretty sure were actually search and destroy bots. Transplanetary liners were only mildly controversial. Rembrandt made a show of paying his carbon emission taxes, and at least she wasn't working for the military. When she got back to her apartment, there were boxes stacked in the foyer. "I'm moving in with my boyfriend. I'll still pay my rent for the year," her friend, who she no longer lived with, said. Morgan hadn't known she had a boyfriend. Good luck with Pavloving that kid, though. That weekend, Morgan called up her tech influencer friend and went to a startup COO's penthouse birthday party, where she ate tapas and onigiri, and was the least interesting person in the room. A friend from school reached out just to catch up, and they panicked at Dolores and talked about how one of their friends had been caught shoplifting from American Apparel, and 2 others hadn't invited Morgan to their weddings. And was Morgan at liberty to give Spaceway referrals? At PowerPoint night, one of her friends presented an AI-generated slideshow ranking the cutest otter pictures on the internet. When she returned to her apartment, the space was intermittently empty, as if some great hand had reached into the room and scraped its guts out in uneven clumps. Morgan considered calling her mother, but didn't want to talk about the next Hermès or Loewe or Fendi she wanted. She wanted to call her father, but she didn't know how to tell him again that she never wanted a family of her own. She couldn't call her sister because her environmentalist sister had cut her off a long time ago. Morgan strapped herself into the immersion chamber and talked to them there. Some feeling settled into her chest, but she didn't know if it was weight or absence. On Monday, Morgan looked surprised when she entered his room. Only for a moment, though. Pictogram cards, some face up, arrayed on the table before him. "My dad makes me do memory exercises," he said, clearly trying not to sound defensive. "Why?" "He said it's good to practice my information retrieval skills." He picked at his cuticles. "If you're going to babysit me, there's a more comfortable chair in the back." Diviner. "You can open the doors. You can raise and lower the temperatures however you like. You say on the 10th day. You're pacing the central hall, the sleeping cells of billionaires lining the walls. You don't even know who I am. Couldn't you crush the ceiling down on me?" "I could." "Why don't you?" "Because I've spent a long time without talking to anybody, and you're here now." X-198. Everybody will be at the Cherry Blossom Festival, and so will we. We won't have lunch in Not Japantown because the udon and sushi places will have hour-long waits. Instead, we'll stop by the Not North Beach pizza place I've been wanting to try for forever. You'll be skeptical of the hot honey and grudgingly admit it's pretty good, and then take a car over. The cherry blossoms will be artificial, polyester and plastic. See, it takes 6 years for a cherry blossom tree to grow, and we've only been here a few months. You'll marvel at the clouds of pink anyway. But others will complain. None of this is authentic, they'll say. They'll point at the Laura bots dressed in kimonos and say they look nothing like the geisha bots that ran the real Japantown stalls. These parasols were made by Laura bots, and that's cultural appropriation. The wheel cakes don't taste right. What godforsaken text-to-speech model was used to generate the J-pop blasting from the speakers? Those accents are wrong, like offensive. Did you ever go to the real thing? You'll ask me. We'll be weaving through the crowd, stopping here and there to examine the stalls by the side of the street. We'll get a greasy tray of wheel cakes to share. I'll buy you a panda plushie that reminds me of you. Same wide-eyed look when you look up at the stars. Once, but I got really bad allergies and never went again. My father didn't let me out much, I won't say. You'll hug the panda plushie closer to you. I guess I've simmed into it, but it was never real. The cost of living phased my family out of the city proper before I was born. My reply will be cut off by a girl yelling to her friends, "These fucking things don't even smell like cherry blossoms." I'll swerve to the left to avoid a woman brandishing a paper fan at the nearest Lorabot, asking what the characters painted across the fan say. Tilting your head to the side, you'll reach up, pluck a blossom, and tuck it behind my ear. The petals won't be as soft as the real ones, but I'll grin anyway. San Francisco. Then Rembrandt announced the Diviner Project. For the meager price of a few $1,000,000, anybody could hop on a spaceship and join the first exoplanet settlement. And this wasn't like some grungy sci-fi style mining project. This was like glamping for space colonization. Passengers aboard the Diviner would remain suspended in cutting-edge sleeper cells, and the hibernation fluid would ensure they stepped off the 3-decade journey no older than when they stepped on. The newly unveiled Lorabots would build the city and cater to the inhabitants' every need, every niche cuisine and luxury treatment. Imagine being among the first in the human race to inhabit a planet outside our system. A true pioneer. He was sending one of his sons on the journey as well. Morgan was sitting with Mason through the announcement. "Are you scared?" she said quietly. He shook his head and reset the board. "Can we play another game, though?" Morgan turned off the announcement and set the first piece down. Spaceway stock shot up the next day. Internal reports quoted Rembrandt saying Spaceway had cornered the market. Nobody would be flying Epilogue after this, and Spaceway could buy up the others' Mars resorts. Morgan heard that guy who replaced her was having trouble dealing with the volume of queries pouring in from the automated customer service. After the glamorous initial announcement, more details were released. With assurance from several international space organizations, the planet X-198 had been confirmed hospitable through telescopic scans and analyses of atmosphere composition, assumed surface temperature, water percentage. It was more hospitable than Earth, one could argue. Bidding wars erupted around tickets. Meme campaigns erupted to infiltrate the Diviner and sabotage the capitalists. Watching it all unfurl, Morgan strategically agreed to a date with one of the important guys who had been asking for a while. They went to a K barbecue place and ordered a la carte. "You know, this place is good," the important guy said, "because there are a lot of Koreans here." When Morgan went to the bathroom, the toilet boasted a panel of buttons, of which flush was not the largest. "Did you watch the latest episode of Enchanted?" the important guy said as the robo-server arranged the meat onto the grill. "What ending did you get? Jason said Ordelia married the rock climber in his, but I think mine is better." Jason was a leader of the employee indoor rock climbing club. When Morgan finally navigated the conversation to the Diviner and asked how the ship could possibly cover so much distance, he shoved his glasses up his nose. "Do you know what a Monte Carlo tree is?" She sighed. "Yes. I'll give it in simple terms for you. It's kind of hard to understand." "Oh, thank you so much." Between chews of beef tongue, the important guy explained that Spaceway had developed a cool new special strategy for spaceflight. Define an actor, the Diviner ship. Define an end state, arrival at X-198. Using the same hyperreality models as the immersion tech, simulate the most probable complications and make the most optimal next move. Not so different from chess or Go. This way, the ship isn't dependent on communicating with home base. That was a problem in a lot of our early probes. Once they got too far from Earth, the signals would fuzz up. We'd get a distress message, and the probe would already have blown up by the time we sent over our answer. Important guy said, gesturing at the robo-server for another helping of short rib. But the Diviner makes autonomous decisions based on its own projections of the future. "So you're basically storing the state space of reality?" Morgan said. "Or at least the most probable iterations?" "Yeah, pretty much." Morgan knew a lot about what data went where, and also the difficulties of indexing and retrieving that data. "How are you organizing it?" Go had a finite set of possible moves. What godforsaken algorithm could possibly sift through so many permutations of reality in a reasonable runtime? He snorted as if she had just confirmed something to him. Just hook a guy to the database and have his brain retrieve them like memories. It's like remembering in reverse, remembering the future. Morgan had been the most promising student of her cohort. She'd gotten Rising Star awards. She had reasonable powers of deductive reasoning and took enough seminars on topics orthogonal to her own to grasp overviews. She went to work the next day with the smell of smoke still in her hair and couldn't breathe when she saw Mason. Couldn't see anything but the kid strapped to some ship by an apparatus of wires snaking beneath his veins, drilling into his skull. So that's why you asked about Augermind. Her hands shook so hard they upset the pouch of Go pieces. They splattered across the table. Shit. I'm so sorry, she said. Mason gathered them. It's fine. I know. I'm really sorry. He shrugged and reached for the Krispy Kreme. Just play. Diviner. You pause at one of the sleeper cells. Inside, floating in the anti-decomposition fluid, is a man who could have disappeared all of your problems with a wave of his hand, who willingly signed on to wake up 30 years older than everybody in the world he left behind. Your parents did data annotation gig jobs for men like him, men who wanted guardrail testing for their latest immersion environments and didn't pay for therapy, didn't care when their giggers killed themselves. You told me all this one night cycle when it came crashing down on you that you were in a canister in space, that you would never see an open blue sky again. Look at his exposed throat. He couldn't stop you from opening his jugular. All his overflowing bank accounts and blood money yachts don't mean anything here. There's a crowbar in the hall just to your left. You grab it, but can't seem to lift your arm to deliver the finishing blow. It would be so easy, though. So you exhale and slump against the cell, a marionette with its strings cut, except one last thread, the one gripping the crowbar. The metal is unnaturally cold. I'm sorry about that. The temperature of the sleeper cells is something that can't change. I speak. So you understand now how I work. Monte Carlo, apparently. Did you get the equations, too? Morgan was pretty thorough. I've always admired that about her. I never told her. Maybe I should have. I got them, you say curtly. But that's not the only thing you came for, I say. Did Epilogue send you? Get the Diviner's secrets. Blow it up so nobody flies Spaceway ever again. To this, you don't give a reply. It's confirmation enough for me. Corporate espionage. I don't know your name. I barely know anything about your past, but I suppose this is what most defines you. That you were sent to destroy me. You glance out the window at the cosmic expanse. Entire star systems you could cup in the palm of your hand, bring to your lips, and swallow like inconvenient pills. Sleeping drugs don't really work on me, you say, pressing your fingertip to the glass. They always wear off, and it's expensive to switch. That's why they chose me. San Francisco. This is how you could take me apart if you wanted. Over the next few months, Morgan cut her hair and thought a lot about booking a trip to Japan. Her friend from grad school came to California to get an abortion, and Morgan sat with her in the waiting room, but didn't hold her hand. Then she went to work and didn't know how to talk around the lump in her throat, so she and Mason played Go. In the afternoons, cognitive therapists in white robes collected him for their sessions, because injecting the database of human potential into a child's brain would be disorienting to the point of dysfunction, and they needed to train him to sift the osmotic entanglement of the simulation's memories and his. But the mornings were always theirs. Sometimes Rembrandt stood wordlessly in the doorway in his effortlessly casual hoodie, watching them slide pieces across the board before giving a self-important nod and slinking away to film more adverts for the Diviner Project or shitpost about whether immersion girlfriends should be offering sliding scales, a tangible user interface to adjust boob size. I read paper books just to piss him off, Mason said, watching his father disappear. I tell the people who work for him that I like antique books, and they give me their old ones, and I read them right in front of him. Tell me the best line you read, Morgan said. He couldn't. So they began a second game, Morgan giving Mason a few minutes to scan a page, then quizzing him on its contents. Can you recite the last monologue of Twelfth Night? What was the first text to be modified in For You media? which Medici was the protector of Galileo Galilei. And when it grew near noon, Mason said, slowly, as if he'd been working up the courage, "Tell me about what the city is like outside the Spaceway building." "What do you want to know?" "Anything. I don't know. I just always wondered what it's like out there now. It's been a while for me. I don't do very interesting things." This was something Morgan had come to terms with a long time ago, but that was what immersion chambers were for, traveling all the places, living all the narratives she didn't have time for otherwise. "Look, I really don't want to look sad, but anything is interesting to me." "Fair point." She told him small stories about going to the South Bay Farmers Market and finding that her favorite brand of strawberries had been sold out for the day, about the Rage Room corporate bonding event that had somehow gotten think pieces about overconsumption written about it, about this other COO's party where the theme was enchanted and only 2 people put any effort into dressing on theme. It was in these foggy mornings, the company air impeccably filtered and somehow still stale, watching the kid furrow his brows from the effort of memory, that a suspicion began to build in Morgan's mind. She had reasonable powers of deduction, after all, and she knew a lot about storage capacities and the energy requirements of information retrieval. "Your playing is off," Mason informed her. "Your openings are less," he gestured abstractly, "today." "Nothing's wrong," Morgan set her pieces down and crossed the room to the doors, which slid open. "I just need to talk to someone to see something." She'd already taken a step over the threshold when Mason spoke. "I know you wanted a Krispy Kreme license." He studied the abstract art along the walls, as if they would clarify into detail with enough scrutiny. "I never asked my dad, because I wouldn't have anyone to play with. I'll ask now, though." "Diviner, for what it's worth, I'm sorry about the insomnia. It must have been frustrating." X-198. "I won't know what possesses you, but you'll host a party. We'll be at a point that you don't have to ask me to help, and I won't need to insist. I'll put up the Happy Not Halloween balloon letters. This will be our compromise after arguing whether we should celebrate on October 31st and October 52nd, and you'll make the orange and black Jell-O shots. I'll sway to music, I know, with people I don't. A guy will come in wearing a cowboy hat and jeans. My puffer vest neighbor will show up in a white shirt and black pants and say he's a software engineer. You'll bet me the girl with the silver balayage is in some romantic arrangement with him. Maybe friends with benefits or situationship or seeing but not exclusive or whatever the giddy first stages of reciprocated interest are called in the future. A woman will pull me aside and ask if I have a stimmer she can use. She'll be upset to tears when I say no. Sometime in the night, I'll find myself in the kitchen nursing a drink with 2 others escaping the noise and the Whopper ad someone looped on the immersion screen. "Do you ever think about leaving?" A woman ironically dressed up as Rembrandt Crow says. She'll have penciled in the obvious jawline, contouring and everything. "Leaving?" "Getting out of here, back to Earth." A guy dressed as a traffic cone will chime in. "I didn't think it'd be such a shithole here. You know, I left my sea sponge face mask back on Earth because I thought I'd have them here, but they don't." "But you paid so much to be here," I'll say. "Not that much," he'll say dismissively, leaning against the counter in a way he clearly thinks is casual. He'll gesture at the woman dressed as Rembrandt Crow. "Oh, and by the way, Melanie, I know you said your bracelet is one of those imbued with the last Arctic ice chunks, but I happen to know the company that makes those, and that one's fake." They'll turn the music off eventually. People will arrange themselves into Lorabot cars. I'll collect red Solo cups, pouring the excess liquid into the sink, and you'll pace the living room, wielding a trash bag, ducking to check beneath couches and coffee tables for errant beer cans. The letters on the wall will have been rearranged to read, "Happy Peen." When the landscape is finally cleared, you'll slump against the couch with an exaggerated sigh, and I'll sit too. And 2 a.m. will melt into 3 and 4 of shooting the shit about things that don't matter. You'll insist again that Halloween is defined by being on October 31st, and I'll insist that Halloween is defined by being the last day of October, which is the 52nd. We'll still be tipsy, Everything will be slightly high-pitched and funny and comfortable. You'll make frozen pizza with the air fryer and we'll eat it on paper plates, burning our fingers and laughing about it. San Francisco. Morgan found Important Guy and asked to see the code for the navigational algorithm. He said that you can't see the code, but you can see the general schema. Here, let me pull it up on my panopticon of screens. And are you free tonight? It was as she had suspected, and she could admit to herself, feared. A Monte Carlo tree search only looks at a portion of possible futures to save the computational load, which meant that if some improbable event occurred aboard the diviner, something so unexpected it wasn't in any of the already looked at realities, the system would spend a great deal more computational power recalibrating. It would have to take the energy to remember all the next most possible futures. Mason's brain already had many more possibilities to sift through than Augermind. An acquaintance who works in hardware had once relayed to Morgan a story about how his company wanted to put generative models on neurochips, but couldn't, because the neurochips got so hot running the programs they resulted in tissue damage. If Mason encountered enough improbable events, he wouldn't survive the processing load. It would fry his brain. Morgan couldn't be surprised. Engineers hedged as much as they designed. The probability of a string of improbable events enough to completely overload the ship's systems was, well, improbable, an inescapable design flaw. Why did she care? And yet, she suddenly became very aware of how coldly impersonal Important Guy's office was, bare walls and a neat desk, smart screens that quickly reconfigured to the user's tracked preferences. Spaceway credited its success to its flexibility. Professional development books had been written about how Spaceway showed the modern power of modularity, how easily its teams could be rearranged, even a scientist like Morgan removed and another slotted in with little effect upon the overall productivity. Rembrandt Crow had many sons. A lightheadedness descended upon Morgan as she scanned over more of the schema. She was sure she wasn't reading it correctly. Maybe the months away from her work had made her less clever. This design, she said, it doesn't say how he'd disconnect from the diviner when they've finally arrived. Well, we've been focusing on other stuff. Do you know how hard it is to encode astrophysics principles into a hyper-reality environment? Morgan pressed her palm into the table for balance. Isn't this important? Important Guy looked genuinely baffled. He'll be out of your skin anyway, and it's not like Rembrandt would sue himself if his son turned out a little funny. Why do you care? It's going to kill him. Important Guy frowned. A few shifts of the embedded touchpad and the screens shifted into a new configuration, one better for day-to-day coding than displaying schema. My mother's nicer to me in the immersion chamber than she ever was in real life. Hers too. How lucky they were to live in such a time that endings could so easily be rewritten, past and future interchangeable, and the only thing they gave up was any sort of collective experience. No internet mobs ever erupted at the botched endings of shows because everybody got exactly what they wanted. In her immersion chamber, Morgan's sister never hated her. Mason would never roll his eyes and tell her she wouldn't have won if he hadn't messed up. She always won in the immersion chamber. Morgan dug her fingernails into her palms. Under the table, Important Guy said. But I've heard he's already paid for some donor eggs to be put on the ship. And the kid's got his genetic sperm or whatever, so his lineage is going interstellar. Isn't that funny? Using your kid as your DNA delivery package. Diviner. Anyway, that's how you complete your mission. Do a bunch of things. So suboptimal my brain explodes figuring out how to fix it, I say. You have a lot of options. Break enough of the sleeper cells I go haywire trying to fix them, or jam the crowbar into the fuel cells. Ask me to steer into the path of a comet. Then we would explode and nobody would hear us do it. Or you could crush me before I take a single step, you say, in a tone that half makes me wonder if that's what you want. The easy oblivion of it. Maybe it would be the only easy thing that's ever happened to you. I don't often miss my body, but I do now. I think I'd like to sit beside you on the floor, our shoulders almost brushing, sharing enough warmth to know the other was there. I wouldn't, I say emphatically, keeping the lights extra steady so you know I'm being earnest. Then I would be alone again. X-198. A few people, including my neighbor who kicked the toaster, will corner me in the hallway of my apartment. Corner is perhaps the wrong word. They'll propose their idea to leave and explain that I need to come with them because they need me to navigate the ship back. They can't take any more of this backwater fucking planet. It's not any of what they were promised. Don't you want to escape too? One will say. San Francisco. Morgan stumbled into a recreation room, one of the immersion chambers. Immersion chambers were such wonderful, courteous things, predicting the future and letting you choose if you wanted to stay in it. In immersion chambers, boys were not inextricably hooked to giant spaceships. In immersion chambers, children were not genetic delivery men for their fathers and unfortunate sacrifices for teams of engineers. Morgan prompted the chamber and stayed for so long that it was night when she emerged. Her eyelids were still damp and her head was too heavy, and she was not any bit less upset than when she had entered. She startled when her vision cleared. Mason sat cross-legged against the opposite wall, a worn book hugged to his chest, and the Go board set carefully beside him. He looked up at her. The sterile, bright lights of the hallway swam in his eyes, casted sharp angles slicing across his face. He had been waiting for her. "How are you?" he said, not loudly enough to echo down the hollow hall. Frosting crusted at the corner of his mouth. He picked up Morgan's employee card when it slipped from her grip, handing it back to her. The image wrestled its way into her mind again, this boy in suspended animation, wires that penetrated his flesh, spiderwebbing beneath his skin. He stood, stretching. He had gotten taller since the first day she met him in the lunchroom. Would he slump lifelessly when the ship finally landed? Or would the wires hold him aloft like a puppeteer's strings? "I think I need to talk to Rembrandt," Morgan said weakly. Diviner. My family needs the money, and this is a big job, you tell me. For what it's worth, I think they'd also like for you to live. You laugh without mirth, and it echoes so sharply that it registers in multiple of my sensors. How can you be so sure? You, the son of the worst fucking man on earth. San Francisco. A robo-secretary let Morgan into Rembrandt's office. Rembrandt wore a different-colored, effortlessly casual hoodie today and baggy jeans. He took a deliberate 2 seconds to look up and gestured for her to take a seat. Morgan could see the reflection of 3 blank code files in what she suspected was a social media feed in the reflection of his glasses. She had heard reports that Rembrandt designed intentionally uncomfortable chairs for his office. This one crooked her back in awkward ways. She'd also heard he made the security team give their presentation in reverse order to test for understanding. Morgan was not someone used to fighting for what she wanted, and she was nervous. "Well," he said, "there isn't any way for Mason to detach from the diviner when they arrive," she said. He scrunched his face in a way that suggested he had no idea who she was talking about before the confusion resolved itself. My son. Yes. I was wondering if you could have the diviner team engineer some disengagement mechanism." "Sure." She blinked. She had prepared for his humiliation rituals. "What?" "Sure. I'll let you do that. It's no skin off my back. I'll have someone go talk to these guys." The chair jabbed into the small of her back. "Thank you." His tone turned performatively philosophical, and he stroked his artificially sculpted jawline. "All that time you spend with my son, don't you ever get tired of it, playing a game with the same 2 pieces over and over?" he said. "Go was the first thing solved by modern AI, if you really think about it." That's really deep," Morgan said. "He's really quite a strange boy, isn't he? Max Excelson. I'm glad he has you, though." It might have been more palatable to her if Rembrandt had argued, if he'd had some opinion on whether his son should live or die, but it was, as he'd said, no skin off his back. He would probably forget his son was gone after a month. Morgan could too if she wanted, unwind every ending until she found the one she wanted to live in. She had never fought with her sister, and she didn't wrap so much of her identity around a donut brand, and she had fought to stop the boy ever stepping on that ruinous ship instead of this lukewarm damage mitigation. If they could solve Go, they could solve something as small as grief, too. I guess, she managed to reply. She felt like there was residual air in her lungs. She didn't know how to exhale it. Morgan got her hysterectomy the next week. Then she called up her friend, who she no longer lived with, and they got drinks and went to the Golden Gate Bridge. Morgan looked up at the starless expanse and wondered if there really could be planets beyond all the pollution. Diviner. I guess I can't give you a real reason you shouldn't do what you've been paid to do. Not much value would be lost. Maybe it would even tank Spaceway's reputation enough for them to never try it again. You probably wouldn't even feel it. Your knuckles whiten around the crowbar. X-198. I'll tell you about the request. I'll tell you what they said to me, that I brought them here, and it's my responsibility to bring them back. That I didn't tell them no, but I didn't tell them yes. They wouldn't survive the journey without me, but I might not survive the journey with them. By then, you'll know me well enough to know that this is how I'm asking you to give me a reason to stay. You'll just have returned from the gourmet grocery store down the street. You'll carefully set down the pickled radish and marbled blue smoothie before sinking into the couch so dramatically that I'll almost lose my balance and tumble into the cushions too. I'd miss you, you'll say simply. San Francisco. Morgan sat with Mason in the hours before the takeoff of the Diviner, while Rembrandt Crow gave a last uplifting speech about how space was the last great frontier, how humanity had mapped the human genome, had created the human imagination in high definition and surround sound, and now it would conquer the widest expanse of stars. I'm going to miss you, Mason said. She shook her head. You won't remember me. She felt certain of this, that jacking into the Diviner and all of its simulations would fundamentally alter the shape of his memory, that the navigational system would prioritize his memories of the future over retrieving the memories of his past. Still, in the flurry of the engineers designing the disengagement mechanism, she had slotted a copy of her own memories into the database, in case he was ever prompted to retrieve them. He might not even survive the flight. But I'll miss you too, she said. On the far wall, the pixels of Rembrandt droned on. Chatter seeped in through the walls too. In other rooms, the passengers of the Diviner saying their final tearful goodbyes to their families as bots dragged their overstuffed bags and necessities into the engorging belly of the ship. Something to remember us by, someone was saying. But send your poor parents a calm when you wake up, Melanie. 14 minutes left. We have enough time for another game if we go fast, Mason said, and reset the board. Diviner. You run your fingertips along the edge of the crowbar so violently that your skin tears and scarlet dribbles down your fingers, and now we both know the taste of your blood, its viscosity against my tiles. If I didn't rip you open, wouldn't that be improbable too? Wouldn't that break you too, you say? I consider this. I consider the men I knew back when I was made of flesh, and I consider Morgan's expression as she stepped from the immersion chamber that afternoon, the way she told me not to hope for anything when she went to speak with my father. I'm not sure the people who designed me really accounted for the emotion of it. San Francisco. After the launch, Morgan resigned from her job. She returned to her apartment and slept in her bed for the first time in years. X-198. It'll be a few weeks or so after the Diviner leaves our planet. I'll have taught the poor guy they elected to replace me as well as I could. But I could never be Morgan. That's what the whole experience will have taught me, but you'll tell me I'm underselling myself. Nonetheless, I remember strapping him into the wires I was once strapped into for the rest of my life. We won't be the only ones who stayed. My neighbor who keeps calling home at inopportune times, for one. Because I already lost 30 years and they'll be all dead if I get into that ship and lose another 30, she'll say. We tactfully prod at why she didn't leave too. Which is all good and noble, but it'll be 14 in the morning, and we'll still hear her yelling through the soundproof walls. This routine will have played out so many times that no wonder she doesn't want to return, only gets an obligatory chuckle. You'll groan and smother your head with the pillow. I'll hand you the earplugs we keep on the nightstand, and you'll take them, roll them around in your calloused palm. Why don't you ever call her? You'll ask, and I'll know you're talking about Morgan. I don't know, I'll say. Even though I will, and I do, it will be because I have never been able to predict her responses. She was always the better Go player. I've always been afraid of mistaking courtesy for affection. I should, though. I'll reach out. Diviner. You let go of the crowbar. It makes a metallic clang against the tiles, which means you now have hands free to accept the tray the Lorabot, the one I woke up specifically to tend to you, hands you. It's a donut. There's no wrapper, but it's warm, and you murmur that you recognize a taste from Sunday evenings with your little brother, fitting the paper hats onto your head, even after your heads got too big for it. Tell me what happens, you say. Not the probability simulation, but just tell me a story. The diviner can only give probabilities, the sequence of actions that returns the greatest reward. But I get to string any sequence of words I want, placing syllables like go pieces, and for all the same reasons, because there is someone real sitting on the other side of the table. So I begin. You'll step from the diviner first. Thank you for joining us for another Clarkesworld Magazine podcast. We have 3 more stories left for you for the month of February. I hope you do come back, should you so choose. And until then, my dear listener, I bid you a very fond and hopefully very temporary farewell.